Hello, ladies and gentle farts. Squirtle and I are back for another episode of Book Talk where we geek out. We let loose on our secret love, which is actually not so secret, and that is books. Specifically, today we are going to be talking about this beauty right here, The Children of Blood and Bone. And I have actually read this book quite a while back, maybe 2 years ago. And when I first read through it, it was good, but it didn't really hit me in any way, and I kind of forgot about it. And I think it must have just been a really bad day or week back then because I read through this just yesterday in about 6 hours. It's about 550 pages, and I blew through it. So this review is really going to be me fanboying on this novel. Now, I would definitely consider this to be more of a, young adult fantasy novel. It's definitely got some bigger themes, so I think adults can enjoy it just as much, but it's definitely a little bit more YA to a degree. The themes of the book are still YA, but I mean, you're dealing with some really heavy stuff in this book. We're talking about themes of oppression, themes of, I don't want to call it racism per se, because it's really more has to do with power dynamics and fear of magic and fear of power and people's ignorance. So I suppose you could say there's sort of aspects to it that really sync up with similar concepts of racism, but it's much more complex. Not that I mean racism is not complex. It's a fucking shit show. But it's definitely like the main central theme of the novel is really just trying to understand what it is to be different than others and how people need to orient themselves around there. So the general story plot is that there are these people known as the Magi. There are 10 clans, and they all have different magical abilities, which are granted to them through their deity, through the god or goddess who they happen to be bound to. And in the past, there was kind of a natural harmony between those who were not Magi and those who were. And eventually, as the Magi became more and more powerful, and they basically understood how to really manipulate their abilities, there were massive power imbalances. There are people, let's say certain Magi, who can, speak to the dead, bring back the dead and animate them, use them as weaponry. There are people who can manipulate flame and just basically incinerate people. There are people who can literally cause disease, which is horrifying, actually. They're known as cancers, and they can literally just cause disease to someone right there in the moment. So these are understandably things that especially for people who do not have the abilities, but even just, I mean, if I was someone who was hypothetically one of the Magi who had the ability to heal, well, someone like a cancer would probably be terrifying to me. I think it would be completely understandable. So these powers are scary, and even though it's not very much talked about in the book, there definitely is some information that is given that says that the Magi were kind of running loose and no one could control them, and they were abusing their abilities. Unfortunately for the Magi, something happened and they all lost their magic. This happened about close to 2 decades back. And of course, the humans, the Kosedan, as they're known in this book, they took full advantage of this and basically wiped out all the adult Magi. And within this series, people only actually develop their abilities once they turn 13. So perhaps you can say in an act of humaneness, they did not kill any of the children. They only killed the adults, who they believed the logic was that they would remember what it is to have magic, therefore they would fight back against it, and no matter what, they would never be happy, and so they had to be wiped out. This, of course, is still completely unacceptable to just wipe out an entire people for the obvious just abuses of a few. It was not obviously the entire culture of Magi who were utilizing their abilities to hurt people. I mean, as I said, there's Magi whose only ability is to heal people. So to kill a bunch of people who have the ability to heal, obviously they did not hurt anyone. So that was a very, very brutal, I want to say unfortunate, it's just a terrible, terrible thing that happened to these people. So then we get into our main story. So when this story starts, we are following a young woman named Zelly, and Zelly is a diviner. She is a young girl who has not come into her magic yet, and obviously magic is gone, so no matter what, she cannot. And she's grown up in this abusive society where everybody looks at people like her who are clearly noticeable because they have pure white hair. So they look different than everybody. They're clearly sought out. All the people who are in power, especially the soldiers, they look at the Magi as less than human. They call them maggots. And they're just severely oppressing these people and utilizing their power to just do really terrible things to them. And so Zelly grows up, and she had seen members of her family be killed during what's called the raid, which is what wiped out all the remaining adult Magi. And she's just constantly been held down, constantly just been in terrible fear. But she's a tough girl. She's really strong. She's focused. And some things happen, and she becomes involved with eventually two people, Amari and Anan. And they are of royal blood. They are actually the royal children of the current king, who was responsible for all this horrendous stuff. And the story kind of winds through Amari and Anan's sort of character development and how they are going to kind of really change, because Amari and Anan massively change. Zelly does definitely have some fantastic character development, but overall she's kind of consistent through the whole novel in terms of who she is, what she stands for, what she believes in. She definitely learns to control her anger, and she definitely opens up a bit more and understands there's definitely more nuance to the world, which is fantastic. But Amari and Anan are really the driving force of the book series, because they're so, I mean, in Amari's case, she's so weak in a certain sense. She's just been kind of kept like a little bird in a cage her entire life, while also being terrified of her father, who is this crazy guy. And Anan is just this boy who's been raised ever since he was young to hate Magi, to fear them, to think of them as like lesser than less, at the same time that he's been brutalized by his father and raised to like give every amount of his humanity over to the protection of Orisha, this land. That it doesn't matter how horrendous what he does is, it all that matters is that it protects his people. And unfortunately, he's raised by a king who doesn't consider the Magi or the diviners to be people. So his protection does not include them. And so you have this really interesting dynamic happening between these three characters. In this kind of story, for anyone who's thinking to get into it, this is a character-driven story. The overall plot line is really centrally focused on the three of their eventual development as friends, as human beings, into adulthood, the decisions they have to make in regards to what's going to happen in the future of Orisha for the Magi, because, and I didn't mention this before, but basically the entire kind of story driving everything forward is that magic is capable of being returned to the Magi. Some people do start to get access to this magic, and these three have an opportunity to bring it back, and that's really what's driving everything forward. So you have this overall arching theme of oppression and violence and abuse of these people who themselves had been abusers and violent as well. Not obviously the entire people, but even the Orishans now, it's obviously not everybody in the world who is abusing them as well. It's mainly just the royalty and the soldiers and the people who themselves are in power. You cannot just blanket statement into every single person who is not a diviner as an oppressor, because they just don't have the power either. So that's really the kind of the central theme of the book, but it's really explored in depth. Zelly and Anan have to go through a multitude of moments where they're trying to figure out, is this the right thing to do? Is bringing back magic the right thing to do? Zelly is hyper focused on this, bringing it back, because she believes it's the right thing for her people so that they can protect themselves and defend themselves and be right. But even she has definite moments of hesitation where she does not know, is this the right thing? Because she sees the power that the Magi can hold. And so it's this really interesting viewpoint of both sides, people who are on both sides, Anan and her, and them trying to really figure these things out. The love stories, the relationships trying to develop, even though they are very childish, obviously, because these people are very, very young. It's interesting to see. It's really just an emotional roller coaster novel. So I would definitely highly recommend this to people who are just looking for a novel they can just blow through in a good way, that just kind of catches you up, and you just, every chapter, the chapters are very simple. It just basically flips between each of the three protagonists, and the chapters don't even have names. It's literally just Amari, Inan, Zelly. It just goes back and forth, which I loved, actually. It just really focuses you in on that character, tells you their perspective, their side of what's happening in that moment, and then goes back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And so you just roll along with the story so fluidly. Tomi really did a phenomenal job in writing this book, especially it's only her second, well, at the time it was her second novel. She had written one other one which apparently didn't do too well, but this book was just, for a second book, for someone who had barely ever written before, it's phenomenal. I can't wait to start on the second one. So I would highly recommend it if you're just looking for a great, phenomenal, interesting magic system, a great series of action. I don't know why I'm having trouble speaking today. I think it's a bit hot in this room. But basically, action, magic, great character development, lush, vibrant world. Basically, if you're just looking for a phenomenal series that you can blow through and just really, really be into it, I would highly recommend to check this out. Now I do want to get into spoiler land, so for anyone who has not read the book and doesn't want to kind of like hear my opinion on specific things in the book, I would move along, go read it, and then come back, recheck out the video. So I think Inan is the most interesting character. I dislike him immensely, but he is extremely fascinating. I think Tomi did a phenomenal job of showing how someone could have so much conflict within themselves. Inan is broken. His father fucked him up just completely, and he is so, there's this good child within him who's trying to get out, but he's just so under conflict because he's just basically been brainwashed ever since he was younger. And there's a lot of people might hate on him because of the choices he makes, the fact that he decides at the end to sort of betray Zelly, because it's not his intention to betray her specifically. It's more so he's trying to push back against magic as a whole. And unfortunately, these things just keep screwing up. And it's the same thing for Zelly. Zelly keeps making these impulsive decisions and screwing up, and so many people get hurt along the way. Amari, to me, is the most interesting character. I love her. I think how can I say that? Inan is probably the most interesting character. Amari is my favorite character. Her development as a person is just phenomenal because she knows who she is. She's just been, because of this brainwashing, because of being just stamped upon her entire life, she's just so like, she's withdrew into herself, and seeing her come out of her shell and really develop as a person and become the lioness, or the lionaire, I think, it was just really, really awesome. Zelly, I don't really like her that much, not in a bad way. I think she's still really interesting, and obviously due to her background and all the oppression she felt and seeing her mother die, like, I understand every single aspect of why she is the way she is, but she doesn't really develop that much throughout the whole book. She kind of is much more static to me than Amari and Inan, who develop more. So it's not that I dislike her. I think she's really awesome. I think she's cool. I think she does so much within the novel, but she just doesn't develop in the same way as the other two do. And I think her decision at the end of the book is just, I mean, again, understandable when she chooses to kind of sacrifice the Sunstone and the scroll for her father. It's the most ignorant, dumb thing anyone can do. I understand it. I understand the fear of, like, your family, your only remaining family is right there in front of you. They're going to die. But just after everything she's gone through, after everything she knows about this king and his people, the fact that she thought that she could just give over these weapons of power and that the guy was just going to let them all walk out of there peacefully is just such a level of stupidity that I just kind of lost all interest in her as a character. I understand it, but it's just so foolish that, and I mean, if I was any of the other people around her, I'm sorry, I would have grabbed those things from her, and if she would have tried to fight, I literally would have probably, as harsh as it sounds, would have just knocked her out. Because for her to make that decision for all of them, she was basically saying, as long as I get my dad back, I don't care if all of you die. And she had already done that when she couldn't figure out if her magic would work, and she didn't tell anybody. She was just constantly, I mean, she told Amari, but she was constantly just holding things back, lying about things, only caring about her own choice. And that's why her brother was so incredibly frustrated with her. Every time she made a choice, she stopped giving a shit about everybody else. All she cared about was herself most of the time. It was her own suffering. And again, I understand that. I understand where she's coming from. I understand because of what happened to her mother, because of all the things that had been done to her. I completely understand it. Does not mean you have to respect it, though. She's just one of the most frustrating characters because she keeps making terrible decisions. Even her relationship with Anan. Anan is slightly understandable. You can sort of get his obsession with her because, again, this kid has been brainwashed his whole life. He's completely messed up, but then by the nature of his magic, he saw inside of her. He touched something. He basically relived her memories. So his intense personal attraction to her is sort of understandable because he's latching on to something to help him pull away from his father. Zelly, on the other hand, doesn't have that excuse. I can understand sort of, just being attracted to someone and wanting him, but Inan didn't really give her any reason besides just, he saved my life. So in that moment as a character, that's why I consider her development to be kind of stunted, because she just turned into the whole boy saved me, therefore. But again, I know it's more complicated than that. I know there's more to her as a person. It's just they're all very young. They're all very young, and their decisions are, generally speaking, really, really bad. The only person who's relatively solid throughout the whole thing is Zayn, who's kind of like the unsung hero because he does everything and constantly doesn't really get rewarded for it. It's like the whole story is focused on the other three. I think Zayn and Amari should become the central focus of the second book, but I know it's going to be focused on Zelly again, even though I consider them to be much more interesting. But who knows? The kind of twist at the end, though, because the magic now has been given to the royals as well, instead of just back to the Magi, I think Amari finally having Magi powers also is going to hopefully put a lot more of the emphasis on her, obviously because of her being the next in line. I don't know if Anan is going to be dead in the second book. There's a part of me that hopes that he can sort of find redemption, because you can see so much of him. There was a goodness there. It was just broken because of his father. I mean, even at the beginning of the novel, before he ever realizes he is a Magi as well, and all these things, he still attempts. It's like he has this goodness in him where he's just like, I'm going to go to this village. I'm going to figure out a way that I don't have to hurt anybody. I'm just going to get this girl and Amari, and that's it. And in his mind, he's doing everything he can to try to figure out a way that he doesn't have to harm people. But it just keeps blowing up in his face, and then he's terrified of his father, so he just tries to push through, and then more people get hurt. So he's just this. To me, Anan is the youngest of the three in terms of his mentality. He's still a scared little boy who does not understand what he's supposed to do, and his father has basically broken him to such a degree that he doesn't know how to be his own person, which is why his relationship with Zelly is so not good because he's just trying to replace her for his father so that he has some kind of guiding light, because he doesn't know how to be his own person. Very, very unfortunate. Hopefully in the second book that can kind of be turned around, or he's dead, in which case, Godspeed. So I would definitely say this is maybe in my top 10 favorite books so far. I'd have to read the second book to really know if it's a kind of series that I'd really want to reread again and again. But for a kind of series that I can just kind of throw myself into and blow through in a day and just really, really love, it is phenomenal. So highly recommend it. I'd give it probably an 8 on 10. It's really, really good. So check it out if you haven't, if you've still read through and kind of ruined half the story. If not, let me know what you think. Comment below. Like, subscribe. Check out the website, geeksandbarbells.com. I am dying of heat right now because my fan almost fell off the ceiling in the middle of the night. I woke up to it hanging like this, and it is a big fan. So I had to take it out, and now I'm dying. Maybe it was punishment to that fan, because this is actually the second time I make this video. I had to redo it all because the first time I didn't realize the fan was too loud, and so the whole video was just so I had to redo this entire thing. Very, very sad. Hope to hear from you all soon. Have fun, have a great day, stay healthy, stay geeky, and get a tan. It's nice outside.